Hello and welcome to the Young Film Academy podcast, the essential podcast for teenagers looking to find their way into the creative industries. And today is a special day. We do this every now and then, where we turn the lens inwards at our own familiar, and today's familiar is very familiar for listeners. It is, in fact, Amelia Sciandra. Welcome to the podcast. How's it going?
Hello, Dan. Thank you so much for having me on the pod as a guest. Wow.
It's a treat. It's a treat. I'm so excited to be chatting with you today about. I mean, I feel like this should be, prefaced with. We could have you on so many times to talk about so many different things.
So rather
than an all things Amelia today, though, I thought it's far more interesting to drill down into particular bits and areas that you work on. And today we're going to talk about voice, which is very exciting.
Voice, yes. Voice. This is the perfect medium to discuss voice.
oh my God. It's so meta. It's so meta already. Maybe this could culminate in sort of a live voice performance. I'm putting you on the spot. We'll find like a monologue and see some of that technique in action. I'm joking. But no, I'm so excited to talk with you. In particular, we were literally just talking about before we started recording about the different kinds of voice work you do. I know we're going to focus probably primarily on audiobooks, but do you want to give us an idea of the different kinds of voice work stuff that you've done before? And then we can sort of explore those different areas.
Yeah, sure. So the main bulk of my work as a voice actor is as an audiobook narrator. And so we can talk about that obviously in more depth, but I've recorded a variety of different kinds of books, and obviously using a variety of different kinds of voices, because that is what it means to be an audiobook narrator. And I've also done some audio for some voicing for commercials and some what's called looping. So going into a studio mostly improvisationally with other actors and providing voice texture to often animated films, but not just animated films. The most recent one I did was an animated film. So, when you see a scene in an animated film and there's a crowd, somebody's got to do all those crowd voices, even though you're not hearing specifics of them necessarily. You're building in the soundscape of that film. And so that's what I have done. And it's a very interesting process that.
Wow.
Lots of different kinds of things. And I've also done like some sort of corporate voice thing where you just read corporate over an animated video or something like this. I've done plenty of that as well. So just lending my voice wherever somebody wants to listen to it.
Oh, amazing. Do you ever encounter your voice or do you have to go sort of looking for it? Do you know what I mean? Like, have you ever done something and then it sort of popped up and you're like, holy moly, that's me. The Pfizer commercial that I voiced did pop up on something and I was like, oh, hey, there's my voice. That's exciting. But that's cool. I often forget as well that it's my voice and then I hear it and I'm like, oh yeah, I did that. It's funny with voices, isn't it? It's like when you see a video of yourself, it's so undeniably you in a way, even though obviously generally when we see ourselves, we're seeing like a mirrored image, but we're still like, oh no, that's definitely a video of me. Whereas the moment we hear a recording of our voices, there's something I feel like in our brains, it's like, that doesn't sound like me at all.
Well, it is true. It is true that the feedback loop from our own mouths to our ears is very different than the feedback loop from our mouths to someone else's ears. And so
interesting.
We don't hear our own voices the way everyone else does. Even recordings of it sound, different to someone than to ourselves because it's our own voice making that sound. So yeah, there is a kind of, sometimes I hear my own voice recorded, like when I'm doing an audiobook, they'll play back some of it to me and I'll think, oh, I can't believe that's how my voice sounds.
Yeah, it must be so weird. Like, do you have to change, let's say, okay, you're doing a character that's meant to be evil or seductive in a particular scene. Do you have to then change your voice based on your misinterpretation of your voice, or is it mainly just the tone and stuff? So inclination is still just carries through, I suppose. Otherwise, we'd all be walking around just saying nonsense at really random sort of pitches,
Yes,
I suppose.
yeah, it is. It is. The really interesting thing about being an audiobook narrator is that you are both the director and the actor simultaneously. Because sometimes depending on the book and depending on the publisher, you might have a director in there with you, but that's quite rare because it's expensive. And so usually it's just you. Sometimes it's just you by yourself. If you like, sometimes I record from home in my own home studio. And so there's nobody helping me. It's just me sitting in a closet or a cupboard reading a book out loud to myself. So it's a very interesting kind of mental game. But typically, if you go to a studio, which is where I do most of my books, because I don't like to, I'm an extrovert, and sitting alone in my closet recording a book for, 10 hours is a bit weird.
This isn't what I was promised when I was in drama school.
Yes. Well, but also because you sit there without any feedback, you do start thinking, is this voice even good? Do I sound, so at least when you go into a studio, you have an engineer, and the engineers are, they're sound professionals. They know what they're doing, and they are helping you both sort of from an audio perspective, kind of making sure you don't peak the mic, all of those sort of technical things.
Yeah.
But also they're following along, making sure you don't make any reading mistakes. And, every once in a while they might go, oh, did you mean to say it like that? Don't you think it would be good if you said it like this? And sometimes they have a good idea and sometimes they don't. So sometimes I ignore them, but other times I'm like, oh, thank you. That's a good point. So you are, when you choose the tone, when you choose the character voice, you're getting to decide that for yourself. So you are the director in that sense. You are the creator of those characters. When I do my process of preparing a book to be read, one of the processes that I go through that every good audiobook narrator does is reads the book and looks for any pointers that the author has given for the sound of that person's voice. Now, not every author does that. Not every author is thinking about their book eventually being an audiobook, but sometimes, a character will be described as having a gravelly voice or having an airy voice or something like this. And so then, I just make a note of that.
Out of the source text.
Yeah.
Out of the source. It's not like you get like a binder with loads of notes being like, this is Jeff. Jeff must sound like he's, smoked too many cigarettes or something.
No, that would be amazing. But no, you don't get that. You are, for the most part, controlling it and creating it yourself.
Wow. That's super cool. So where does the feedback come from? Like, I suppose there must be times where you have a particular idea about a character and they're like, oh, no, we see it differently. Do you get notes from an author at any point, or do you get notes from like a publisher, or they generally are just very happy?
They're generally very happy for you. That's where the kind of creativity and ownership really comes in doing audiobooks, because for the most part, you get to create the characters as you see them. Very rarely, and it has happened and it does happen, the author might hear something and go, I really didn't expect that or want that. And you might have to go in and re-record, but that's expensive. And so typically they're just going to have to get over it. When you are chosen for an audiobook, the author has heard your voice. They've heard your sample, or they've heard you reading other books. So they know the sound of your voice, and they've said that that's the sound that they're interested in having. So it is a big exercise in trust, I guess, from the author and the publisher's perspective, that they go, well, this is the voice that we think can do it. And so, you get to take that as the reader, you get to take that ownership, which is really enjoyable and not necessarily, it's a very different kind of acting. It's not like any other kind of acting I've ever done, because it is this really kind of strange, isolated, and there's no, it's not even like if you voice a cartoon character where you're doing dialogue. When you do dialogue in an audiobook, it's dialogue with yourself. It's you're reading one character, then you're reading the other character. So there isn't that sense of give and take. You have to create and manifest all the energy yourself. So it's very cool, very creative, but it's a different kind of exhaustion than I'm accustomed to. I've never experienced that kind of exhaustion, because it's really exhaustion on 3 levels. It's physical exhaustion, because you have to, speaking for 4 hours in a day is tiring. It is just tiring.
Yeah.
It's mental exhaustion, because you are making sure that you're reading all the words right. You are trying to remember the voice you did for this character who just showed up again in chapter 20, but hasn't been in the book since chapter 1. And you're going, what did I do for them in chapter 1? And you're reading the notes you have and you're going, those don't make any sense. And then, and then depending on the kind of book, it can be emotionally exhausting. So
yeah,
I have, for some reason, done a number of books about World War II and the Holocaust, and those are very heavy to read, and they take a lot from you emotionally. So I go home from a day of recording, and I don't want to talk to my husband. I don't want to do anything but kind of sit on the couch and become a vegetable.
Yeah, and assumedly not watch sort of documentaries about that era.
Yes,
it's
and
like,
watch
okay, it's time to go home and put on cartoons.
Yes, watch cartoons or the most ridiculous comedies you've ever seen, like just something where I can shut my brain off, laugh, hopefully, and forget a little bit about the horrors I was reading about that day.
Of course, yeah, because I mean, yeah, I didn't even think, I mean, I know in film you do get depressing films and you get very uplifting films and stuff, but generally the set, unless it's like a really serious topic, more often than not, the set is still a nice energy. And you've got a really nice team and crew around you.
Yeah.
Whereas I suppose what you're talking about in the world of recording audiobooks is you might work on a depressing book or a book with like, a really sensitive or tricky subject matter, and there's almost, for the duration of the recording, that's your existence, I suppose.
It is. And it's true. Like, I haven't really done a single happy book. For some reason, I've been put into the list of audiobook narrators who will read about really depressing and sad things. So even the kind of crime novels that I read, the crimes are always quite heinous. I did a memoir, which was a very odd experience. Usually, if a person writes a memoir, they're going to record the audiobook of it themselves.
I was going to say, yeah, I would have thought that they would record their own.
They would use their
book.
own voice because they're writing about their own lives, but for whatever reason, this author didn't want to do that. And so I read her memoir, and she had a very horrifying childhood, being raised in a cult.
Yeah.
And so
Oh my word.
that was a really tough one to get through. And you've hit the nail on the head. When you're on a set and the subject matter is serious, you sometimes very purposefully, when cut is called, you want it to be kind of buoyant. You want to lift people up out of that headspace.
Yeah.
Whereas with this, there's usually just one other person. And I really give ups to the engineers that I work with. They really do try to like come in and make a joke and kind of have there be some levity so that we're not just kind of mired in sadness or despair, depending on what the book is about. But
of course, yeah.
But yeah, it is
holding hands at lunchtime, just like crying together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
we tend to take a tea break and then like leave the studio, get some tea, and try to talk about anything else that we can, so that you take a break a little bit from the mental pressure of, I've just read a lot of books where there's like child abuse and kind of really dark things. And so you have to kind of get yourself out of that mental headspace as quickly as you can.
I was going to ask if you do a different voice depending on the seriousness of the piece, but it sounds like you do a lot of serious pieces, so you probably don't have like a different audio reel. What's the right word for that?
A voice reel, yeah. Demo reel or voice reel.
But do you have one for, like, say, a kid's book? Like, do you have like a different voice and you send that out as well?
Yeah, definitely. I have my narration reel actually needs to be updated now that I've done as many books as I've done. But in the first instance, my narration reel, if you want to think about getting into audiobooks and you want to make a narration reel, is that you just choose some stories that you make sense being the person to read. So like if it's a first person narrative about a man who's in his 60s and you're a 14-year-old girl, don't read that book in part of your reel, right? That's not the book you're going to get chosen to narrate. So I just, chose some books by my favorite female authors that have a female lead character. And that's what I used as my narration reel. Now I can make a reel out of all the books I've done. But And I have been thinking a lot, actually, to your question about doing some children's book voices so I could try to get some children's books and take myself out of this dark, depressing world I've somehow found myself in as an audiobook narrator. But it's an interesting... Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, kids' books probably going to take a considerable amount less time as well.
Oh, exactly.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
You could be done in 5 minutes.
I could record a kid's book in an hour and a half, yeah. But I think what is interesting about the world of audiobooks is that narrators do tend a little bit to get pigeonholed. And that depends sometimes on the sound of their voice, the timbre of their voice, but also just sometimes in the things that they do. So I've been really, really conscious, like I'm trying to kind of branch out from crime and Holocaust novels so that I don't get pigeonholed into just doing those kinds of books, because like I've got a friend, and for whatever reason, she just got onto the romance novel train, and she's made her entire career on romance novels. It's absolutely brilliant, but they're romance novels. So they're a specific kind of book. They're not always the best written. They're, and she said to me the other day, she said, I would kill to do a crime novel. And I was like, we should swap. Like you get you get a romance novel and I'll get a crime, and we'll just switch and we won't tell them, and hopefully they'll accept it.
Yeah. Do you reckon you could put on each other's voices as a voice actor? Like, do you feel like you can stick in another person's?
No, it's so funny. Actually, I was listening to her. I was listening to her speak in this conversation, and I took a moment to kind of just like stop focusing on the words and listen to her voice. And I thought, can I sound like her? And I could probably do like a bad impression, but I don't think I could, her voice is her voice. And that is the really cool thing about audiobooks, is that they are, while yes, they want to hear if you can do accents, they want to hear how you can modulate your voice. What they're looking for in the first instance is just your regular voice for narration.
Yeah.
They just want to hear, and they're looking for, whether it's distinctive or not, they just want like a clear tone, and they want to hear your voice as it is. So, I don't think there's any kind of voice that has to be an audiobook narrator. Any of them are work. It's more about like how well you read, and and like I said, about your ability to modulate for character, and perhaps do accents. Lots of books don't require accents, but I know certainly a lot of the books I've gotten are because I have facility with accents and I speak another language, and so I can put those kind of differentiations into my reading of a book. And therefore that perhaps makes me a bit more attractive as a narrator than someone who can't do those things.
How do you go about accents? Because I feel like obviously in today's world there must be far more sort of thought process of at what point is an accent a replica, and at what point is it almost like a stereotype? Do you know what I mean? Like I feel like it's easier maybe with certain languages, but if you're sort of like crossing sort of race boundaries with accents, then there must always be that apprehension, or does that just generally not come up so much? Or
it's actually kind of a big thing that's happening in the audiobook world right now about white narrators doing accents of people who are non-white. And in my experience, I had a book where one of the main characters was described as having a slight Indian accent. He had been born in India, but raised in the US. So his accent was slight, but he had it. So I prepared that, and I listened to a lot of Indian people speaking, Indian American people speaking English. And I, took a few of the qualities of that and kind of tried to put that onto my voice. Not a stereotype, not trying to do a caricature, but just trying to put some elements there into my voice. And we recorded the first couple of chapters, and then the publisher sent an email and said, we don't want any Indian accent. So then we had to go back and re-record those chapters with me just doing a different voice. So that was disappointing. I wish I had learned that before I prepared it, but it is what it is.
For sure.
And so, it's an interesting thing that's happening in audiobooks, where I think some people are really passionate about kind of not doing that, not voicing anybody that isn't the same race they are. But then it's like, so then who do you get to read the book? Because if the main characters are white and the other characters are Indian or any other from any other place in the world who are not white, what do you do? So it is a big question, and for the most part, the answer that I hear from publishers, the things that have come up is just don't worry about doing anything. Just do a voice, not an accent. Just give them a vocal quality rather than trying to do their accent.
Of course.
Because when you do try to do the accent, if you're not careful, if you're not purposeful and you're not curating it, then it does sound like you're making fun of them. And that's a really important thing that obviously we don't want to be happening. But for the most part,
it must just be such a careful line anyway. So it's almost like not worth it, which is why you sort of understand. And I suppose where the publisher's like, let's just not even go near there.
Let's not even go near it.
Of people misinterpreting it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but for the most part, I do regional American accents, regional British accents, and then because I speak Spanish, I do Spanish accents. So
amazing.
And then I do some European, like continental European accents as well. But again, for the most part, those people are the same race I am, which is why I can do that. And I speak fluent Spanish, so I can do that as well. So I think it just kind of is what is in your wheelhouse and what's in your DNA too.
What's the most accents you've done in one book?
In one book, I read in my own voice. Then the character was Mexican American. Then there were Spanish people from Spain, French people, British people, Irish people, Germans, and there were like 4 lines in Hungarian. So that's 8 accents. The Hungarian, obviously, I just like listened to the phrases in Hungarian and then tried to repeat them sort of just by sound because I don't speak Hungarian and I don't have time to learn Hungarian. But I did have to learn how to pronounce like 4 phrases in Hungarian. So 8 accents in that book, which was intense.
Was that fun? Or you're going to tell me it was a Holocaust book now, aren't you?
It was a World War II book, yes.
I was like, wow, that sounds like such a fun topic. But like, it doesn't matter if you're doing an accent, it's still sort of like,
it was a less heavy World War II book than some of the others I've done. It was about a woman who is a spy. So it was kind of espionage.
That's cool.
Very cool stuff going on. But it was in the background, it was set in Spain in the Second World War. So there was still, awful things happening. And,
There was no sort of romance plot in this one. Otherwise it might have gone, I suppose, to your
No, there was no.
friend.
Actually, that's not true. There was a romance plot, but he died. So it was sad.
That's tragic.
Yeah.
Wow, they're so cool, like being able to do all these different voices and stuff. Do you give them options of voices, or you just pick one? Is there ever any sort of like pre-recording, like, oh, here's what I'm thinking for this person, here's what I'm thinking for this person? Like,
no, like I said, it is the prep that you do is your personal prep. It's how you want to address, how you want to attack it yourself. So no, I don't ever kind of every once in a while I'll do a voice and then I'll say to the engineer, is that too annoying? Is that too silly? Because while I have lots of accents and vocal qualities in me, I also have lots of silly voices in me. And because I have not gotten yet to do any like animation or anything where I get to use these silly voices, every once in a while I bring some qualities into these novels. And then I'm like, but does that sound really silly? And sometimes the engineer will say, yeah, it's a little silly. Or they'll say, no, that's fine. So I'm always trying to kind of pick up vocal qualities and voices that I hear out in public. And like, I think, I'll use that for a character. So it is, because some people do just in their regular speaking voice have interesting kind of off the wall qualities to it. So, yeah.
No, it's so cool. I was wondering as well, like, I assume the answer is no, just because it comes down to options and sort of what you give to people. But there must be so many ways to read so many sentences. In terms of where you put the oh my god, intonation, not
emphasis
inclination.
Is maybe what you mean.
The emphasis, yes. What happens if you get a difficult sentence and you don't know where to put it? Because I suppose you might get some sentences where one word is italicized and it's very obvious where you have to put the the emphasis.
So a lot of that is like just trusting yourself and knowing that sort of And there are plenty of times when I start a sentence and I go, and then I just stop reading and I say to the engineer, can we take it back to the beginning of that sentence? Because I can already tell I've put the emphasis in the wrong place, or I've suggested a comma where there's not going to be a comma, things like you take a breath and you realize that was the wrong place to take the breath. So but again, all of that is that is you controlling that. So there is a lot of, I know a lot of actors who say, I couldn't do an audiobook. It's too much pressure. And, I get that. There is, there's nobody else making those decisions. You're the director, you're the actor, you're making all those choices yourself. And so I think a lot of it comes down to trusting yourself. I've read enough books now that I can pretty much start a sentence and figure out where it's going to go. But also, I've read the book before. So when I do an audiobook, I always read the entire book before I go to record it. So
that was going to be my next question, whether you're sort of like, you are live listening to it. You might say a dramatic sentence and then you're like, oh my God, I didn't see that coming. But you did see it coming because you've read it in advance. Gotcha.
I've read the whole book. I've read the whole book before I record it. So I know what's coming. And because of that, you can sort of begin to feel, okay, here's where I need to add some drama, or here's where I need to pull back on the emotion because I know the really emotional part is coming next, or, things like that. So but you can really, if I were live reading a book, it'd be a different thing. If I was just cold reading it and I'd never seen it before, it would take me. But again, I think you fall into a pattern. You begin to understand, one chapter in, you're like, okay, this is how this author's writing. So you begin to sort of get your mind around the syntax, the way they, punctuate their sentences, all those kinds of things. So you can kind of give over to that a little bit. I think sometimes when I'm reading a book, I get into like a flow state, and especially if it's like a big chunk of narration, and I can just read like a whole page without stopping. Which is a bit mad. Like I have engineers who have said to me, like, it's crazy that you can do that, that I can record 2.5 minutes without stopping. But again, that's just practice. And also I think I read a lot of books like myself. I'm a reader. I read for pleasure. So I've read a lot, and I am accustomed to a lot of different authors' voices and the way that they put things together. So when I encounter a new one, I go, okay, I got this. I see what's going on here.
Yeah. Do you ever get so good that you forget that you're recording an audiobook, if that makes sense? Like, there's been times where I've played FIFA with a friend, and the next thing I know, I almost feel like I'm coming to, and I don't realize I've been playing FIFA for the last 20 minutes.
Yes. Every once in a while, absolutely. Every once in a while, when I get into a flow state of reading, I'll just like be reading and reading and reading and reading. And then unfortunately, when you come to as an audiobook reader, you then mess up because you're like, oh, I'm reading a book. And then, and then you're like, oh, I need to actually, so it's an interesting thing. And I really try to find that flow state. I try to give over to the book so that it has that natural sense of being read, rather than feeling really chopped up and disjointed. But yeah, it's a very interesting thing that your mind kind of begins to, it's like almost getting lulled into a sense of, now the book is going on, and here we go, and here we go, and here we go.
Yeah. Interesting. So when you're doing that at home, obviously, I know you can obviously just jump back and re-record over what you've done. I assume that's the process. Could you give us a bit of like an overview of like the technical skills required and what tech you actually need to do it? Because I don't know if teenagers do record audiobooks, but it sounds to me like that's the sort of thing that you probably do get with young adult books occasionally. So for our listeners that maybe are like, I want to put together a reel, but I don't know if I have the technical competency to do it. Like, what sort of skills, knowledge do they need? What sort of software are you using and stuff to do it at home?
Yeah, so you can absolutely do it at home. I mean, there's lots of voice recording software out there, and even all of the like GarageBand, for example, has a voice recording kind of thing on it. But even like, I'm pretty sure even QuickTime has like, you can just record voice record audio on QuickTime. So there's lots of ways to record. Obviously, better interfaces are going to have more possibilities from the technical standpoint. But I think what is important to know is that when you are a narrator, even if you're recording from home, you don't have to worry too much about a lot of the technical stuff, because the book will be sent off to an engineer no matter what. So
gotcha.
The main things are really about how you record. And the most common way of recording, because it's the fastest, the most efficient and time-saving, is what's called punch and roll. And that's where you're recording, and if you make a mistake, you get taken back to before the mistake, and you punch back in and re-record over that mistake. And so by the time the recording is completed, there are no mistakes you're aware of. Now, of course, you've made mistakes, and they have lots of software. They have two things. They have software that goes through and listens, like AI, to see if you've that compares it to the written word, but that can't catch everything because it's a robot. And so then a human goes through and listens and matches it up to the text to catch any errors that you've made. And that's often, just like reversing word order or pluralizing something that wasn't plural, those kinds of things. And so
there's a whole thing with brains try to leap forward, don't they? They try and work out what words are before you've even read them. And I imagine, is that generally what happens with sentence structure? Is that your brain's like, I've seen this sentence 1,000 times.
Yeah. You do that. You start to read. I start to read, and then I go, I know how this will go. And I read it. And then the engineer comes on and says, you swap those words around. And it's like, because I would have said, Amelia personally would have said those words in that order, but the author has written them the other way.
Yeah.
And that might be wrong or that might be right. It's really not a question of grammar. It's just more, I have to read what the book says. I can't just decide to change the word order. So punch and roll is kind of the best way to go about it if you can. Now, sometimes, but punch and roll requires you to have kind of certain softwares that have that capability, and not
at least like a GarageBand sort of where you can see the timeline of audio.
Exactly. So Audacity is a free program that you can do punch and roll on, because you can see the timeline, you can see the waves of your voice, and you can go back and find where you made the mistake. It's usually then you go back to where you've taken a breath. Which is often the beginning of a sentence or at a comma, when a clause changes in a sentence. And that's where, if you're by yourself, or the engineer will drop you back in at that point. There's also a kind of another version of it which I've done before, which is every time I made a mistake, I clapped. And so that will cause a very high wave in the timeline. And then the engineer, this is when I was recording by myself, I would clap on my mistakes and I would go back, and then the engineer looks through the whole timeline and just goes to the claps and does the editing himself. Or herself. That is, that's the other way of doing it. And as you can see, I think even in my describing it, you can see how that would take longer to edit than a punch and roll would. So typically you can, or not typically, but sometimes, depending on the book, depending on the relationship that the publisher has with the recording studio or the engineers they're using, you could have a rate to read the book punch and roll, and then a rate to read the book the other way. And you would get paid more if you read the book punch and roll, because it takes less work to kind of finalize it.
Interesting. Wow. So, and who do you have that conversation with? Is that through like an agency, or like, do they come to you and say this book is punch and roll, or do you say like, what would you like for this particular project?
They decide that. So that's the. Let me try to describe. Let me try to vocalize it the right way. So basically, I'm just literally looking at one of my emails. So typically they've decided a rate for if you were doing it in a studio, and then there's a slightly higher rate if you do it at home punch and roll. And it's higher because they don't have to rent out the studio. They don't have to they don't have to have an engineer with you that day when you're recording. They just hire the engineer to do the post. So you can get paid more to do punch and roll. but that is more pressure on the narrator. Yeah. If you're by yourself and you're doing punch and roll, that's more pressure on you. You've got to get the tech right. You've got to have your booth set up so that you have the keyboard as well as the book open, as well as being able to see the screen. So that depends on your setup and all of that kind of stuff.
Which was going to be my next question, actually, which is what kind of physical equipment do you need? I assume a microphone, no matter how good iPhones are, they really are great at recording audio for like demos and stuff like that. But for an actual polished audiobook, I imagine you want a dedicated microphone. And what do you need to create a space that's suitable? I see, because you can't just record an audiobook in a kennel, for instance. It's going to be too much barking.
My brain has finally remembered the name of the other thing, the other technique besides punch and roll. It's punch and roll or fluff and repeat, which is hilarious.
Ooh,
fluff and repeat.
I like the sound of that one.
But fluff and repeat is the one where you clap, you fluff, you make your mistake, you clap, or you do something loud, you snap or click your fingers, something loud that jumps the wave to let the editor know later on. But so punch and roll is used much more often.
Gotcha.
Okay, so if you want to record something, the truth is, like, if you've ever seen a lot of people recording voice at home, what you're very likely seeing is kind of what I'm seeing right now on my screen, which is Dan really struggling to get inside of his hoodie. But
I was trying to not lose an earphone as well the whole time.
But that is so, like, you could just be on your bed with a duvet over your head, over your body, and your microphone. The main thing that you want to do is have the
like
least
in
amount.
Harry Potter. Mm-hmm. In the third one.
Yeah, where he's reading
Lumos Maxima.
Lumos Maxima. You want to have as little sound coming in as possible. So
gotcha.
If you've got a cupboard that you can fit inside of, that's a great way to go about it. If you haven't got a cupboard, then you can just do a duvet over yourself. I know, like, friends who have needed to record something in a hotel, so they go into the desk in the hotel and they cover the desk with two duvets and they put pillows all around. You basically cocoon yourself in to try to mask as much sound as possible, and then you record. Now you can get a decent microphone.
Some vitamin C tablets or vitamin D tablets if you're spending all day.
When you're spending all day inside a cave.
In a pillow fort.
Basically a pillow fort, yeah. You need you want to get a decent microphone, a decent kind of audio microphone is kind of a mid-range price, I would say.
Okay.
They're not, there's obviously crazy expensive ones, really, really nice ones, but a decent one is not too much. It's like a great thing to ask for as a present. It's like a bit more than maybe you'd want to spend on yourself, but maybe about how much someone who loves you would want to spend on you.
For sure.
And then you probably want a pop filter. So a pop filter is a kind of little... usually they're circular. They have like mesh.
Obviously this is completely audio, but this is so funny because I'm watching Amelia stare at a pop filter in front of her right now.
Trying to describe what a pop filter is.
Trying to describe it.
So, it basically...
What do you see before you?
It's a little screen that, and it's called a pop filter because on our plosive sounds like P's, we can sometimes pop, which means we can cause like quite a jump in the waves on the sound recording. And so this kind of tries to prevent that. It kind of smooths out those B's and P's and D's and T's so that they're not spiking they're not peaking the recording every single time.
There are other ways, though, without a pop filter, aren't there?
No, I was just about to say, if you don't have a pop filter or can't afford one, you can do what Dan Allen has done, which is he's covered his microphone with a sock. It is the poor man's pop filter, and it works just fine. It works just fine.
It does.
His audio is coming through very clearly. You're listening to him. It's all good. That's like... and then headphones, but you can use any headphones. That's really those three things and a computer with some software for recording. And like I said, Audacity is free. And then there's plenty that you can pay for that all have, lots of different things. But if you're just starting out and you just want to record some audio and sort of hear how it sounds and practice, that's all you need. And you want to try to record, obviously, in just the quietest place you can find, so that there's not a lot of background sound or interrupting sounds. Because the thing about even a not that great of a microphone is that it picks up everything. So you want to test your levels. You want to identify how much you want the gain up and down. So the gain is like how much of the sound around the microphone it's pulling in, and the higher the gain, the sort of wider that circle goes, and so it collects more sound coming in. So that if I click right near the microphone versus if I click far away from the microphone, it sounds different. But on a very simple basis, those are the things that you need. And when I first started, I didn't have a studio. So when I did my auditions, I just covered myself in a duvet in my house, and I managed to get audiobook jobs just having a decent microphone and being under my blanket.
Would you recommend, is there any difference between USB microphones, which I know there's some good ones like the Blue Yeti. I know we have a few of those at the office. But then you can also get XLR microphones, which require an additional piece of kit in order to then connect that to the computer.
Yes.
Have you noticed, is there much difference or much advantage going one way or the other?
So when you first start out, a USB microphone is enough. I'm recording this podcast episode right now on a Blue Yeti, which is a USB microphone, and it really suffices. It does what it needs to do. The sound quality is good, and I can do what I can record in any interface that I need to record in, which is what's great about a USB microphone, is that you can just plug it into your computer and go. XLR microphones, when you get a little bit further along in your journey, is what you would want to change to. So when I first started, I had a different version but a Blue Yeti that was a USB mic. And then my husband and I kind of saved up to buy quite a nice XLR microphone because we were both getting a fair amount of audio work, and we wanted to have that, and we wanted to build our own home studio, which can be very attractive for audio work. That's actually something I do quite frequently from my home studio that I didn't even mention at the beginning, which is I do this kind of, how to describe it? It's called ELT recording. It's English language testing recording. So when some people go to test centers in this country or in the US to prove that to test their level of English, they will have a listening section, and it will be two people, having a little dialogue, usually about something totally random. And I do that kind of recording often from home because it's done virtually. Everybody's all over the world. And that's a really interesting kind of voice recording because you are recording for different levels of English. So sometimes you're doing like the beginner level. And so you need to read the conversation like this. Hello, Dan. How are you today? Like, you have to put these big pauses in. You have to speak really slowly because the question will be, what was the first question she asked him? And they'll have to say, how are you today? Yeah. And then you kind of do the intermediate, which is where you speak a little bit more quickly, but you still are quite pausy. So the intermediate would be, I'm going to go to the store today. I want to buy a pink shirt. And then the question will be, what is she buying at the store? And you have to say a pink shirt, and then you get to the more advanced levels where you're typically just having like a regular conversation. But again, they're very strange. It's always like,
I was thinking, hey. Do they just pull in like Leeds accents, like Brummie accents? No, we're taking it to the max.
That's like that's beyond the expert level to be able to understand.
It's still always RP, right? It's still always like posh English, I guess.
But it is why. It's why they use American accents like mine that don't have a lot of regionalities quite often. And then if they're doing it for British testing, it would be in RP. So it would be in this very quote unquote proper English.
Yeah. God, so give us an example of advanced.
Hey, George, are you going to do your homework tonight? I'm thinking I'll do my project on music. So it's like still weird. It's still a bit stilted, but
that was tough. I struggled with that one personally. I joke, but I'm genuinely getting flashbacks to like GCSE French.
Yes, it's exactly that thing, but the other direction, right?
Yeah, confession. I only took French because I fancied this girl that took French, and I was so bad. I kept asking to drop it, and they wouldn't let me drop it. I was
That's
much
hilarious.
better at German. They wouldn't,
That's
but
so
they wouldn't
funny.
let me. It was too late.
Too late.
But yeah, but you have to listen to those tapes, don't you?
Yeah.
And
So
unless they were going to swimming pool or a library.
Yeah, exactly. Instead of bonjour, je suis la jeune fille. It's like, hello, I am a little girl. Yeah. So
you'd already lost me. I didn't know what you were saying.
Yeah. I speak enough fake French. I speak enough like basic French and then can fake the accent well enough that I do lots of French accents in my audiobooks.
Oh, amazing.
And I just recently did a book that was set in Paris, and like almost half the words were in French, and I had to send a list to my mother who speaks French and say, can you tell me how to pronounce all these words? Because I don't speak French well enough to know the pronunciation.
Oh.
But if you tell me how to say it, I will, I'll be able to mimic it.
Yes, which I feel like must be an important skill, to have that sort of control and also understanding of what it is you're hearing, so you can sort of replicate and stuff.
Completely, yeah.
With I assume as well in France, the English audiobook in France must be. I assume it's just the same English audiobook. You don't do like an English audiobook but with a French accent for English-speaking French audiences.
Depending on the book, they might have an audiobook that's in English, and then they might go and get an audiobook done in, of a translation of the book in a different language. But no, if it's a book written in the English language,
okay,
it will be read.
So commercials then, to step away from audiobooks.
Yeah.
Is that much closer to actually just normal acting commercials, in the sense that a brief comes in, you have to audition, but is it just you send in an audio clip of you, how you would do the character? How does it work, getting audio commercial work?
Yeah, so it's, for audio commercial work, it's typically not a character. They're looking for you to be the kind of the voiceover of a commercial, which is usually like talking about a product or just doing some sort of dialogue almost in a vacuum. So the Pfizer commercial that I did, it was a kind of very uplifting commercial about how science is going to save us. This was during the pandemic, and it was about how science was going to save us. And so the audition was the actual text from the commercial. And it was about 12 lines, maybe 16 lines of text. And they gave you some idea of how they want it read. Please sound hopeful. It's usually a lot of adjectives about how they want you to sound when you're reading it. And typically for an audition, you would send two or maybe even 3 takes that are a bit different. So you'd give them some options to show them, I could read it like this, or I could read it like this. And then when you actually go in to record, that is more like a sort of typical acting job. You've got a director there. When I did it, I had a director. There were 2 producers who were listening from a different country. You've got lots of different people kind of feeding in. And I ended up doing all of the lines, but then they took my voice for a couple of them. And it was a bunch of different voices kind of reading through the ad. So yeah, it's always a bit, and it is really interesting, because sometimes it's like 3 words, and they're going to ask you to say those 3 words over and over and over again with different intonation, with different emphasis, with put a little bit more of this. Can you sound more fearful? Can you sound more hopeful? So that is where you are a bit tested as an actor, and you have to just kind of try to continually give them different options.
Do you ever feel like they're just trying to make the most of you being in the studio? Like, part of me is thinking, how many takes does it really take to get an audio thing? Because when you're in film, right, you might only have time for 2 video takes.
Yeah.
And the actors are so good generally, and you've cast them well. So you know that you've got one time to get it, and you might give some adjustments and then go again. And on a lower end production, or like an indie production, or even on a lot of TV, that's it. It's 2 takes, you're moving on.
Yeah.
But obviously you've got more time, I suppose, in an audio space. So is it just are some of the notes you just feel like the director's trying to prove that he needs to be paid for things?
I did feel like that a little bit on the Pfizer ad. Like, we just read it so many times. And by the time I read it, the 17th time, I was like, I don't think there's any different way I can say this. There's not that many words. And sometimes you can put the emphasis somewhere and you just sound crazy, So like, they're not going to use that take where you just sound nuts.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's I do think there is a little bit of, but you're right. It's like they've got you in the studio. They may as well just try to get, and in those moments I feel badly for the editor, because I think that editor is going to have to listen to 30 minutes of me just saying the same few words over and over and over again.
Yeah. And there's definitely a point where I feel like they stop getting better and they start just getting different.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine sort of the corporate voices involved, because I know this happens on commercials as well, like video commercials, where you're talking about whether the plant pot should be moved 1 inch to the left and what the impact of that would be. And the reality is, no one's going to notice the plant pot, but there's just, when there's so many opinions and you micro dissect everything, you create the illusion of grand choice when actually they're almost just micro divisions of very little change in a way.
Absolutely. I think you're 100% right. And I think that in a commercial, that the visuals doesn't quote unquote match the audio, when it's just complete voiceover. Because what was happening in the commercial is very different to what you're hearing. I do think they're just like, get her saying it 100 times. So we've got 100 different ways. And eventually one of those ways is like, ruh, 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 ruh. And it's like, that doesn't, that's ridiculous. We're not going to use that.
Yeah. Could you just do it once more this time? Could you just bark like a dog for the entire line? Yeah. As if you were a dog.
Give us the intonation of the lines, but in a meow of a cat, so that we have a cat option,
Just in case they want to, remarket the product for cats.
For cats, exactly.
It's a lot more results orientated by the sounds of it than I know acting in person. Like when you train to be a director, you're often discouraged from what's called results orientated directing, where you say, please put emphasis on this bit and then do exactly this at this moment. You're much more encouraged to give people motivation and focus on what the intention of the character is in that moment. But here, is there any of that, or is there any sort of intention, or is it all just sort of results orientated with voice?
I do think that there is some intention, but all of the intention goes towards the result. So it's like, they do give you, he did speak to me in some ways like an actor, but then they do give you notes, they do give you adjustments that in a live acting scenario, you would never say to an actor, be more hopeful. Like, you would never say that to an actor, because that's not, you can't play hopeful. That's not an action, but with your voice, you can inject the sense of hope into your voice, and so it's like, that's what they're looking for when they say that. So they are looking for these kind of technical modular changes that you then make to your voice that don't really have necessarily anything to do with the quote unquote storytelling or the motivation behind it. It's just, we want this quality from your voice, and this is how we're going to ask you to get that quality.
I joked earlier about, getting you to do a demo at the end, but I feel like we've been absolutely sort of spoiled with some brilliant performance work. Looping then is sort of the last sort of thing in the list. I know you mentioned corporate voices, but looping sort of, I imagine corporate is similar to commercials in that way. Is there much of a difference? Or
corporate is about trying to make really boring copy not sound boring. Because often with corporate copy, you're reading just like the most boring, there's no story. It is like sometimes it's doing the voiceover for explaining how someone should, do a timesheet or something like this, how someone should record their spending, and so you're, in those senses, clarity is the most important thing, but it's also about when you're reading about something that has absolutely no excitement in it, that you don't just make it sound like the most boring thing.
Okay, so guys. So if you need to save your timesheet, you click this button, the one that's on the screen. I don't know.
Yeah.
That kind of energy.
Yeah, exactly. And so instead you have to be like, let's look at how to submit a corporate timesheet. And it has to just sound like exciting, even though it isn't,
Wow. You sold it to me. I'm ready to do a timesheet.
You're ready to fill in your corporate timesheet.
Whereas on the opposite end of the spectrum, I imagine is looping, which sounds so fun in terms of creating landscapes. Is that mostly, you say, for cartoons, or is it for video games?
Yeah, you can do looping for video games. You can do it for cartoons. They also sometimes could bring you in to do looping for a live action film where they just didn't get the Foley sound on the day. That can be quite difficult, obviously. So yeah, looping is really interesting because it's quite improvisational. Usually they haven't got text necessarily written for you. They've got an idea of things they want you to kind of say. And then you are just kind of talking. And they're picking up your talking. And the interesting thing about looping is that most of the time they've really just directed you on things not to say. So the film I did recently, they were like, you can pretty much say any. It was we were doing background sound for a scene in a restaurant. So
nice.
There was a lot happening in the scene that needed to be heard, right? The dialogue that needed to be heard. But then there was a lot. It was a lot of visual storytelling in that moment because it was an animated film, and so there just needed to be sound and that there would be music as well. So they were like, well, you're at a restaurant, so just, converse like you would be having a conversation with someone at a restaurant. Just make sure you don't say God, because they didn't want anybody saying, oh my God, in the Foley, which was interesting.
Okay.
And so then you just kind of sit and talk to someone and go, someone you've never met. Like, I'd never met these people that I was doing this with. And then you're like, yeah, I ordered the spaghetti. What did you order? And they're like, oh, this lasagna is delicious. And I'm like, oh, maybe we can get some Parmesan cheese. Can you call the waiter? Like, you just start sort of improvising, and it is meant to be that kind of, it's something that until I did it, I had never thought about it. I had never thought about the fact that when you watch an animated film or a film in general, that somebody is providing that sound for the background that layers in. And so
I would have thought it was just, crowd ambience number 3 just sort of gets dragged in, which I know happens on a lot of films, but I suppose maybe less so on animated if they're trying to line up mouths.
My guess is animation, they're more likely to do looping because, they want to line up mouths, and they also want to control what is heard, if anything is heard. So it's not like crowd ambiance. What if somebody's talking about something really weird or that you would never talk about in a restaurant at dinner? So it's those kind of things that impact it.
Yeah, I once had some crowd ambience sound that midway through someone yelled cut, and then like sort of 30 seconds later someone shouts action. And honestly, for ages, I didn't realize it was the background ambience track that I'd laid in. And I was like, where is this cut and action coming from? I was like, it doesn't sound like me. It was a film I directed that I was editing. Like, how can it possibly have materialized? But yeah, you'd be surprised what you find in those sort of channels.
Yeah, those free sounds, yeah.
With the dialogue, I suppose it strikes me as almost sort of funny with corporate, you're almost trying to make something boring sound interesting. But with looping, it almost feels like there could be an element of trying to make something interesting seem more boring because you can't detract from the main action.
Yes, and that is the challenge. Is like we did it a couple of times, and then I sort of got into it, and I sort of started doing some kind of cheesy, sort of funny things. And a couple of times the director was like, "Oh, I really like that," and then another time he was like, "Oh, don't do that; it's too distracting." So it is almost like trying to make the interesting more boring, so that because they want it to feel real and they want it to feel lived in, but they don't want you doing something where the person watching the film is not watching the film anymore; they're thinking about whatever that. Basically that
like,
extra
I hope
said.
they got their Parmesan cheese. That poor lady.
Yeah.
No, that's super cool. And then it sounds like that's actually possibly the most social of all the types of audio recording then, if you actually get to do it with other people.
Yeah, that was the first time I'd like been in a room with lots of other people to do voice work. Usually it is a bit more solo and a bit more, and often it is that thing nowadays of like, you're in a room, maybe the director and the engineer are in the room, but the producers are elsewhere and they're listening on their phones or they're listening on a computer call. You know, they're not in the room there with you. So it is, voice work is that kind of less personable kind of acting sometimes. So yeah,
for sure.
That's an interesting quality about it.
Just before we move on to our last couple of questions, I wondered what a day in the life generally is like for doing any of these sort of recordings. Maybe if you're going to a studio or if you're working from home, do you do it for long hours or do you have to take breaks? Because then do you have to do it at a limited window so that you can do it for multiple days in a row? Because I know it's a constant battle of West End people, isn't it? It's constant like steaming of the vocal cords just to try and preserve. How have you, what does a day look like?
When you do a book, you are talking for as long as you can in a day. So it is, you know, when I go into the studio, I go in for 10, we start recording, we take a break usually at 11:30, we take an hour lunch from 1 to 2, and then we take another break at like 3:30, but otherwise between 10 and 5, I'm talking, I'm recording, I'm reading that book. It is very tiring. And many, many times when I'm doing a book, I'll go home that first night and I will steam my voice. And I drink a lot of kind of throat soothing tea. I drink a lot of ginger tea. You know, you're doing all those things to care for your voice as you're recording. So it is very intensive in that way when you're doing audiobooks. If you're recording from home, you have a lot more freedom. You know, if you want to record at 9:00 at night, you can because you're at home. So you can structure your day. Now, typically, funnily enough, when I record from home, I pretty much do the same hours I would do in the studio. I kind of start around 10 and take breaks when I need them. I do find that I record a lot more in a day at home because I forget to take breaks and I forget, you know, I'm the only one monitoring myself. So, you know, I forget to take breaks.
That flow state.
Right. I go into the flow state or I forget to go pee. And then suddenly I'm like, oh my God, I haven't gone to the toilet in like 5 hours. I need to get out of this closet. So it's, and then, I might go later in the day, you know, I might decide to take a break in the afternoon and then I'll record some more at night because I'm at home. But it is heavy when you're doing an audiobook. It is sort of all at once and they are trying to get the book done kind of in the least amount of days possible. So it is that kind of, it's tough on your voice and it requires, you know, you need to know how to take care of your voice. You need to know how to rest appropriately. I do a full voice warm up any day before I record. So I wake up at home at like 7 if I'm going to go in for 10 because I do like an hour warm up of my voice to make sure that it's healthy. And then you've got to cool down your voice at night as well. So it's learning all of those kind of tips and techniques to make that work.
Amazing. So our last two questions, you know them very, very well. What were you up to in your teenage years that prepared you for these kinds of skills? And we'll focus, I think, specifically on the audio stuff because that's been obviously the area of focus for this episode. And then what advice would you give that teenage self as well?
Yeah, well, when I was a teenager, I was... the story I love to tell everyone is that my freshman year of high school, so that's the first year you're in high school in the U.S., you're 14 and 15 that year. I was a cheerleader for the basketball team. And
not known for being particularly vocal cheerleaders.
Known for being actually perhaps often.
Oh, they do. They do say stuff as they.
Yeah, they do. They do say stuff, but
give me an A.
Yeah.
Give me an E. Yeah, sorry. I think I was thinking of like, you know, basketball cheerleaders where it's just like such loud music the whole time and it's just dancing.
Yeah, I mean I'm
dancing for anyone that can't see. Which is everyone.
Except me. I can see you dancing. this was high school, so it wouldn't be so loud, so musical. We did do cheers, so there was actually a lot of shouting. Probably not actually healthy voice work, if I'm honest, funnily enough. But then I did not have a good time being on the cheerleading squad. I sort of had a very American movie experience of the cheerleaders being quite mean to me.
No.
And I was dropped. Amelia. I was dropped out of a stunt. I was like being held up in the air, and I fell out of the stunt and fell to the ground. And like, I'm just quite lucky that I didn't die. It was very,
Wow.
And after that, I said, I don't think I want to be a cheerleader anymore. And I quit cheerleading and I did the musical. And then my life was set on a path that it has never strayed from. That's 20 years later. So I joined kind of the theater at the end of my freshman year, and I was in Fame, the musical. And then that kind of set me. I had done some acting in middle school and some classes. And then from then on, I was just the theater kid, and I became the president of the drama club, and I ran the theater group at school, and I did theater outside of school, and I was performing and directing and all of that. So I think all of that led nicely into working in audio. I think the main thing, actually, one of the things that really influenced me to do audio was that there was a show we did, and one of the scenes was at a train station, and we just needed the voice of like the train station lady saying, the next train will arrive at 11:15 or something like this. And I did that voice live over the microphone each night of the show, because I wasn't on stage, I was stage managing. And like 2 parents of my friends came up to me afterward and said, "You've got a really nice voice over the microphone. You should think about doing voice work." And I sort of never forgot that. I thought, well, that's so kind of them to say. And it kind of led me to wanting to do this. I think the other thing that I was doing when I was young that led me into this is that when I used to read myself, I would often read aloud to myself and do funny voices for the characters. So that was something I was doing. And I was a babysitter. And so when I would read books to kids, I was babysitting like before bed, I would do all the funny voices. And I knew even as a teen that I wanted to be doing, it was always a dream of mine to be an audiobook narrator. So I think I'm very lucky to be able to say that I'm living a dream, which is so cool. Because I love to read. And there are moments when I'm sitting in the studio and I think to myself, oh my God, I'm getting paid money right now just to read this book. Like, how incredible is that? So that's... I
was picturing a flashback of you, and I was like, just get this girl a kid's book.
Yeah. Get me
flex
something.
Those early muscles.
Get me something. And then what advice I would give my teenage self would be stop worrying about what everybody thinks about you. I think it's a battle lots of people fight well into their adulthood. But firstly, like, people really aren't thinking about you that much. People are mostly thinking about themselves. So there's that. And secondly, like, who cares what people think? I think if I could have released some of that, perceived judgment, if people were judging me or if they weren't, I perceived they were. If I could have released some of that perceived judgment and the self-judgment that I was doing because of the perceived judgment, I think I could have been much happier and kind of found my bliss more early on than I did, because I just thought I was so afraid to be sort of quote unquote uncool, but I was so uncool, and who cares? Like, cool is so subjective, especially when you're a teenager. So just try to release yourself from that and do what makes you happy and what you're good at. That's the other thing, is if you're good at it and you like it, that's what we need more of in this world, is people following that impulse rather than really anything else.
Amazing. The exciting thing, Amelia, this doesn't often happen, but we have a question, and you as guest get to also be involved in the answering of the question.
Oh my gosh.
It's from Becky, who's from London. She's 17. She actually wants to get into voice work, but is wondering what's the next steps? What's the first steps, is what she says. Who does she contact, I suppose, is what she's asking. Where can she list her services? What would you suggest?
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to do that. I mean, the first thing that you need to do is make a reel. So you need to have a voice reel, which is a little sampling of your voice doing different things. So when you make a reel for voice work, you want to, on your big reel, include a little bit of everything. So you want to have a little bit of narration, you want to have a little bit of commercial, you want to have a little bit of corporate, and you might even do like gaming animation voices on that reel that has like everything on it. As you get more kind of advanced and, maybe once you've done something with that, reel, maybe you get an agent or whatever, you might then create more specifics, shorter, smaller reels, like a narration reel that's just narration, a corporate reel that's just corporate. But you kind of want to make a big mix for your starting out and show your voice in these different kind of contexts. So, and the way that you do that is you just find things to read. You can go, you can just do a Google search of ad copy and get advertisement copy, or you can just watch an ad and write down what they say and then do your version of that. Maybe it's Maybelline, those kind of things. And
Brilliant.
so
Again.
And so you want to create a reel as your first, that's your calling card, right? That's your kind of audio CV, if you will, is your reel.
Yeah.
And then you can write directly to agents. Especially if you're a young person and your voice kind of sounds young, that can be a really great, what we call a USP, a unique selling point. So, you can write to agents and say, I am this age, but I can make my voice sound like this, because sometimes they want something to sound like a child, but they don't want to hire a child. They want to hire someone a bit older who can sound like a child,
work longer hours,
and can work longer hours legally and all of that kind of stuff. So there's all of those kind of producerial things that come into it. But so you can write directly to agents. You might look for agents that specifically want young people, and then there's lots of places on the internet where you can kind of put your voice out there to submit to jobs. So there's something called Voices 123, for example, and that's where you can just kind of make a profile, look at jobs that people have, and submit. I think there's some paywall stuff on that site, but places like Mandy, and then other kind of voice specific places that you can, just a quick Google search will show you, are places where you can put your voice out there and let people know that it exists. You also, I recommend looking up, lots of people are kind of making like independent audio dramas, where there won't be much pay, but it will be a great thing to start out with and get a sample for your CV, get a sample for your reel. And the other thing is to just make some audio work, make your own audio drama, get some friends together, do a reading of a little audio drama that you write or that you found. And that way you've got kind of something to show as your calling card. Something really important here, though, to say is that you want to be careful with how much of your voice you put out there before you've done it professionally because of AI. So AI is a huge, I don't want to say problem, because there's lots of good things that AI does. But in the voice world, we have a lot of people in the union and people who are fighting for better protections for voiceover artists from AI, because truthfully, with the amount of my voice that's on the internet, just from my audiobook samples, they can easily make an AI clone of me if they wanted to. And there are some audio artists that are selling their voice to be made into AI, which is, I got a lot to say about that for another day probably, but so
probably underselling it as well, right?
Oh, definitely.
I feel like
definitely underselling it. They should be, if they're going to get their voice, if they're going to have their voice used, they should be getting millions and millions of pounds.
I was going to say, if it's a lifetime clause,
it's going to be used in perpetuity. You should be paid so much money, and typically it's like one lump sum of like $60,000, which is a lot of money at once, but that's not going to serve you your whole life, So, I think it is also about being careful.
And then you can't get more work, probably.
Yeah. Well, as soon as someone realizes you're one of the people that sold your voice, you're not going to be very well liked in the audio world. So it's just about being careful when you do make a reel. Don't try not to put it too many places. Try to be careful about where you post it and who you send it to, so that it's going somewhere legit and they're not just going to sell it to a robot to make a copy of your voice.
Amazing. Amelia, thank you so much for this. It's been a blast.
Thanks, Dan. It was so nice.
And I'll see you on the next episode.
Yeah,
as well,
so nice to be on the other side of it all. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Take care, guys. We'll see you soon.